the church that was built on top of the slave dungeons. Hey, welcome to My People's Truth, where every Friday my podcast dives into the untold stories, unfiltered struggles, and the different experiences that Black people go through in today's society. I'm your host, Ayana Johnson, and we're here to confront the uncomfortable head on. For the people that say,
"Oh, it was a long time ago, you should just forget about it."
this is for y'all people out there that say that. Our ancestors, before they even got sold into slavery, were at this castle for months at a time before they were shipped. And what they did to our ancestors, nobody talks about, or not enough people know about. They did psychological warfare, basically. They had to walk through 4 doors. If they couldn't fit through the doors, then they would have to either stay in the room in the door that they could fit in for weeks at a time, or they were forced to walk longer distances to lose the weight in order to fit through the door. And once you could fit through the last door, which is the point of no return, you are known to not make it out alive. In the dungeons, let's talk about that. So, also in the dungeons, they would fit at least 100 to 150 people in one room. The men and women were separate. And the rooms had no sunlight, pitch black, dark. In those rooms, there were bodily fluids, all bodily fluids you can imagine. So that's poop, pee, throw up, all of that was knee deep. That's just some of the conditions that I'm talking about. The point of no return was the window, and it's the last thing that our ancestors would see before they were shipped off and on the ships and sold into slavery. So the men were standing in the human fluids, human fluids for 3 months at a time before they were getting on the ships. Also, I want to mention there's 10 to 15 men in a room in that cell. They wouldn't let them out until they knew the last person died. So say if all 10 went in there together, 9 of them died, and they're waiting on the last person, the 10th person to die. So they didn't open the door back up until all of them were dead. And they used that as psychological warfare for the new people coming into the castle. Now back to the men's quarters. So like I said, they were knee deep in the human waste. And of course, since it was pitch black, dark, nothing, the air, you could imagine how the air smelled. You do not want to be breathing in those types of toxins with no type of air ventilation, and that's what they had to do. Now, for the women, it's just as bad. I say a little bit worse. The women, of course, what you think they were SA'd and R-word. You know what I'm talking about. By the governor that ran over the castle and by the soldiers that were there. The drunken soldiers were known for essaying the women there and R-wording the women there, and also the governor. He would do that and choose his person for the night that he wanted to essay or R-word. And before he did that to them, he would dip them in the well water to cleanse them before he did what he wanted to do to the women. Now, say if the woman didn't want to be essayed or R-word, if they rebelled, then I got this from one source says something, another source says something. So I heard this from one source that they dipped them in the water until they nearly drowned and would stop fighting, the essay. And then the other source says that another form of punishment was for the women to stand in the sun in one spot with a 25 kg weight ball chain shackle to her legs, or she would have to hold one in her hands for 4 hours plus. And another form of punishment for the woman if they tried to rebel against the SA is that they would tie the weight to her ankles and just throw her in the ocean. If he didn't decide to do the plethora of things that I just gave you, he just decided to beat them, to break them down physically and psychologically. And if one of the ladies ended up getting pregnant and it was their time to be shipped off and sold into slavery, like shipped off so they could be sold into slavery, they were thrown off the boat because they were deemed invaluable if they're pregnant, because they thought back then that if you're pregnant, no one wants to buy a pregnant lady, and they just thought that they were invaluable at the time. Now, if they were pregnant before they even got onto the ships, if they survived that, they were sent off somewhere nearby the castle to raise the baby until they were off of breastfeeding. And then once they were off, the baby was off breastfeeding, the women were sent back to the dark rooms or to the dungeon. Now, aside from the conditions from the men and women, let's talk about the church. The church that was built on top of the slave dungeons that had holes in it so that our ancestors could hear the people in the church praising their God and singing and dancing. The church was on top of the dungeon where the slaves were below the dungeon, starving of starvation, malnutrition, all of that. And on top, they decided to build a church to celebrate their God and sing and dance, while men and women below were starving and dying. But that's not the point. The point is, before they even got on the ship, our ancestors still had to go through that, even before what they taught you about slavery in the books. And that's what's wild, is because not enough people know about it. And when I learned about it, I was just blown away by just how crazy the world is and how they really don't want us to know about our own history at all. How they keep certain things from us so that we don't bander up the knowledge and the courage to stick together and become one, because that's what they're afraid of, us all teaming together. But I just wanted to make sure you guys have all the resources that you have so you can see it for yourself. I have all the sources that I got this from. I'm going to list it. I'm your host, Diana Johnson, on My People's Truth. Hope you learned something on this episode today, and I will see you next Friday.